In this video, I will discuss methods for tracking user sessions. Okay, suppose we have an IP address lookup tool that maps from IP addresses to locations. We've got all the basic lookup functionality working, but we want to count the number of queries that each user has made. We can't just count the total number of requests, we need a separate counter for each user. Now the servlet lifecycle tells us there's just one servlet in the entire application, so we can't use one counter in the servlet because it's shared by all requests. So how do we keep a count for each user? This is actually a big problem. The HTTP protocol doesn't have any concept of ongoing connections. All of HTTP is said to be stateless. This means there's no memory of previous requests or any relationship between requests. But this is where cookies and sessions come in. Cookies were introduced to the Netscape web browser in 1994 as a way to maintain state and track users between requests. Application servers use this technology, as well as URL rewriting, to automatically provide a concept of a session that tracks your users' interactions across multiple requests. So what is a cookie? Well, it's just a special header that's inserted into HTTP requests and responses. And here's what happens. So first the user makes a request, and then when the server receives the request, it realizes that the request is from a new visitor. It attempts to set a cookie in the user's browser by adding a set cookie header. Now, once the browser receives the set cookie, then whenever it makes another request to the server, it will pass that cookie on as a header. See here, when the user sends back his or her response, there's a cookie header that matches the set cookie we saw on the previous response. Finally, the server now knows that the browser has a set cookie, so it doesn't want to keep sending the cookie over and over again because the browser is remembering the cookies. You can set cookies manually in a servlet. You can create your own and configure them exactly the way you want. However, it is usually easier to let the application server automatically manage cookies. In a servlet, the automatically managed cookie is referred to a session. You just get the session object from the servlet request object, and then you can set and retrieve any values from this object. The application server ensures that a cookie is generated, and will make sure that whenever the user comes back, the matching session is there in the request object of your servlet. So this code is a very simple example of how we might count the number of times a user has visited our site. Now, as I'm talking, perhaps you've already thought of some problems with the basic idea of using cookies to count visits. What happens if the user has disabled cookies? What happens if they clear their browser cookies? Or what happens if a malicious user intentionally sends the wrong cookies? Well, cookies are not perfect, and you need to be aware of this. There are a number of considerations. Sessions are simple to use, but they're not reliable. The application server will try its best to hide their unreliability. So if cookies are disabled, it will attempt to track the user by modifying the URL. Also, the application server uses a special encryption on the cookie so that malicious users can't confuse the session tracking system. But I would recommend using sessions sparingly. They're great for keeping track of logged in users or perhaps associating a shopping cart with an anonymous user. However, using it as a general purpose storage of application state is a bad idea because it's unreliable and it doesn't always interact with the user in the way they sometimes want. For example, clicking the back button doesn't reverse or undo cookies. And if the user has two windows open at the same time, then it's treated as though it's the same session. So this would mean they couldn't log into two separate accounts at the same time. So if you want to keep track of users, you can use a session to do this, but you need to be very careful as sessions are based on cookies and cookies aren't very reliable.